Buddy, thank you for being with us. This is our fourth session for the New Leaders Academy. We are walking through this journey. After tonight, you will all have your PLN gathering with your coach facilitator, and then we'll have one more session of this in April. So we are just so excited to have kind of journeyed on this path with you. We're looking forward to tonight. And the last session, the fifth session of this. So welcome. And it is my, well, before I introduce our esteemed presenter, I do want to also just acknowledge some folks who are here with us. We have the interim president and CEO of NCEA, Kathy Mears, with us, who's joining us. So we're great to have Kathy with us. We also have the Director of Academic Excellence for NCEA, Jill Annabelle, who's, I guess, relatively new to NCEA, but I don't think new to everybody on this gathering. So great to have Jill with us. We also have some of our wonderful facilitator coaches. We have Val Mara from the Archdiocese of Hartford, and we have Henry Fortier from the Diocese of Orlando. And I know we are going to eventually, I think, have Lauren Casella, who's not here quite yet. And then finally, we have John Reyes, Dr. John Reyes, who's Executive Director of Operational Vitality for NCEA, who's kind of running the show, steering the ship, if you will. So welcome to them and welcome to all of you. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Kristen Dixon to all of you. Kristen is the superintendent in the Archdiocese of Seattle. Kristen is just an incredibly wise leader, someone who I think has the respect of people all across the country, just for her thoughtfulness, for the way she leads, especially in this COVID time. I've been using a line that Kristen told me on a podcast we did almost a year ago, right when the COVID-19 had shut everything down. And Kristen made a comment to the effect of, I'm choosing not to think about what might be dying through this process, but rather what might be being born. And I think it's been really illustrative to me to really look at how we can think about some of the challenges that we face, as tragic as they are, obviously, on a personal level, but the opportunities that they might be providing to us. And so it's my privilege and honor to introduce and to turn over the presentation to Kristen Dixon. So Kristen, take it away.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm honored to be here, and I'm feeling a little, well, I'm definitely humbled because we're in the presence of such wonderful people here. And so I will humbly begin, but I would ask for your full conscious participation, just like Mass. There's not very many of us here tonight, which is great. That means that we get to speak up in a small group. We can do that. So I look forward to that. So I'll just go ahead and start then with prayer. So this has been probably one of the best, what has been born is the frequency of our ability to pray with one another, at least in the Archdiocese of Seattle. We meet every day at 11 o'clock with our principals, and it's only for half an hour. And we begin with prayer always, but it is a prayerful time. It's not all about prayer, but it's definitely a prayerful time. It's one where you're going to hear about solidarity. We really stand in solidarity with one another. So we'll begin. And keeping in mind all those people that we need to pray for, our teachers, our families, in gratitude for their willingness to hang in there with us and to fight the good fight. It's been a long year for all of us. So let's begin in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And Jesus said to them, "Go out to the whole world. Proclaim the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. Whoever does not believe will be condemned. These are the signs that will be associated with believers. In my name, they will cast out devils. They will have the gift of tongues. They will pick up snakes in their hands and be unharmed should they drink deadly poison. They will lay their hands on the sick who will recover. Blessed is the leader who has not sought the high places, but who has been drafted into service because of personal ability and willingness to serve. Blessed is the leader who knows where she is going, why he is going, and how they are getting there. Blessed is the leader who knows no discouragement, who presents no alibi or excuse. Blessed is a leader who knows how to lead without being dictatorial. True leaders are humble. Blessed is a leader who seeks for the best for those who serve. Blessed is a leader who leads for the good of the most concerned and not for the personal gratification of their own ideas. Blessed is the leader who develops leaders while leading. Blessed is the leader who marches with the group, interprets correctly the signs on the pathway that leads to success. Blessed is the leader who, with head in the clouds, but feet on the ground. Blessed is the leader who considers leadership an opportunity for service and an honor to serve rather than service to honor. Almighty and eternal God, you create all things in wonderful beauty and order. Help us now to perceive how still more wonderful is the creation by which, in the fullness of time, you redeemed your people through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns forever and ever. May God bless us, keep us from evil, and lead us to everlasting life. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. So I just want to start with, you've been on this journey together, and I have not. I was here briefly with your previous presenter, and what I would like to do, because we have such a small group, I would like to ask you just to speak up, okay? So I would love to ask you about the collective inquiry and the cycles of collective inquiry, and I would love to know what qualities in a principal need to be there in order for this kind of collective inquiry to happen. What qualities of a principal need to be in place? Anybody can just speak up.
I think a principal needs to be flexible in order to be able to have that collective inquiry, not set in a certain stone exactly what they want, how they want it, but be more open, more flexible to get new ideas, think out of the box with their team.
Great. That's a great answer. Thank you. Other ideas?
I would add that it's a balance of the flexibility with the adherence to mission and everybody on the same page. So it's a balancing act of the two things all the time.
Great. So the mission has to be clearly the vision needs to be clearly stated and clearly embodied in the life of the school for this collective inquiry to take place. That's great. Thank you. Carrie Ann, you were going to add?
I think it also needs, the principal needs to be really mindful of the trust that they have with their teachers and work continuously to maintain trust, to make sure they're being relationship oriented and that they're aware of the different relationships that the teachers have with one another in order to be really effective at collective inquiry.
Can I dig a little bit on that one? I love that answer. How is trust a part of this? I mean, tell me more. Explain that a little bit more.
Well, I think it's like it is with students. If students don't feel safe and like they belong, then they aren't going to have the risk-taking ability to be able to try new things. So I think that as principals, we have to also realize that that's true of adults and how adults learn, and being able to be risk takers together. All of our answers really could be enmeshed because you have to have the everybody has to have the same vision and a commitment to the mission. And then in living that out, you have to trust one another well enough to be able to say, oh, maybe that was a miss, and I'm going to go this way now, and be able to admit together when things are going really well and know your strengths, and also when maybe things need a little bit of redirection. So I guess, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Thank you. So then you also talked about the role of the principal with hiring and terminating. That's probably one of the most important roles. And the best advice I ever got on that was the best way to avoid a bad hire is not to hire them. Sometimes principals will hire when there's a sense of urgency and wanting just to get it fixed. And boy, do you spend a whole lot of time on fixing that. So that was the best advice somebody gave me, and I just wanted to pass that along to you. And obviously getting the right people on the bus, that is critical. So it is a cycle, so it's never ending. And part of what we're going to do today is part of the cycle is really to look at that data. That's super important in terms of feeding the cycle of inquiry. And also, as important is that understanding of systemness and how the principal is part of not just the culture of the school, but also the culture of the entire archdiocese, the region, the archdiocese. And how does that play out within this data culture? And then lastly, this operational vitality piece. And Kevin shared with me that it was really tough when you were looking at your cash flow worksheets in January, was it, Kevin? That was a challenge for everybody. Yeah.
I think January was better than the fall. The fall was the harder part.
Okay. I want to tell you that that's something that all of us are struggling with. And we have a joke that we say in the Archdiocese of Seattle: if you've seen one budget in Seattle, you've seen one budget. People do it differently. I wish we could say we're much more systemness about that, but boy, that's not the case. So then moving into this, I know you've talked about a PLC, and I know that when Susan Aveline first came to our archdiocese and talked about PLCs and the work of the PLCs, you don't necessarily, it's not a thing that we do. It's just, it's the process. It's not the content of what we do. It's the process of how we live, and it's ongoing. I love that first one, a relentless focus on learning for all students. That's how that cycle of inquiry takes place. The trust is that we all want that. We all want our students to do better. And how are we going to do better? Now, as I think about it, as a superintendent, I think about my principals as my students, and I want that principal to do better. How are we as a team going to help that person do better? So definitely it's relentless, and I love that definition. Second one, a collaborative culture and collective effort to support student and adult learning. Collaborative, collective. Truly, it is all about being willing. You talked about building trust, relationship, vision. All those things have to work together in order for you to have that collaborative and collective culture. And then finally, the results orientation. So that's where the data comes into account. It's like, okay, so we said we were going to do it. We did it. Now, how do we know that we've done it? Right? It's those three questions of accreditation. What do students learn? How do they learn it? And how do we know that they've learned it? Now, what are we going to do? So that's where we're at tonight. So I would just love to know, because I laughed. I told my team that I was going to talk about these three topics with you. And I said, it was like Kevin Baxter pointed to every wart that I have in my life and said, okay, you talk about those three things. And I laughed because data is a tough one for us in Seattle. And I'd love to know if you would just share with us, what is your experience of data in your school? I have to think about that in terms of school now. It's not diocese, but school. How reliant are you on data? Let's just talk about it.
I think this year, especially as far as our school, we've really focused on, we use a program from Star Math and Star Reading just to enable us to see if we lost a lot of the learning from the previous year because of the COVID and the pandemic and the virtual learning. So it's really been a strong emphasis for us this year to get that base, not only in the fall, but now mid-year, looking forward to the end to see if there's been a decline, if it's stayed the same, plateaued, or if it actually has shown growth. So we've really been relying on data this year to not only motivate the parents, but also, I guess, substantiate what we've done as a school and as a faculty.
And so how often are you doing the STAR testing then?
We're targeting 3 times. So we've already done 2. Now in May, we'll do our 3rd one.
That's great. That's great. Others?
Yeah, I've been a principal before, but this is only my 2nd year in the Archdiocese of New York, and they use MAP data. And I really like it too, because they do it 3 times a year. So what I've really enjoyed is for the first time as a principal, I can compare apples to apples and really talk to a teacher about what's going on from the fall to the spring and how to drive instruction. We actually just had a data day today. So we looked at our winter to winter data and came up with some goals for language and writing in our school-wide, and then each teacher had to set their own personal goal for when we take the test again in the spring.
That's awesome. You guys are all inspiring me. Thank you. Now, we use the MAP test up in Seattle, but because we've been remote and then in school and out of school, it's been tough for us to be able to do that. So Danielle, did you do a remote MAP?
We did in the winter. They asked schools to volunteer if they wanted to do a pilot, and I volunteered our school.
Good for
So we
you.
actually did the pilot in November, and then in January, all the archdiocese, whether their students were remote or in school, they did it. Everybody had to be on Zoom, and everyone took it, whether they were remote or in school, we took it.
Good for you. That's awesome. Rebecca, what were you saying?
Yeah, I would add, I'm also in the Archdiocese of New York, and actually I've been using map data for maybe 7 years prior. I love it. I haven't experienced as a teacher or leader any data that is more valuable than what we get from MAP. And I think the pandemic, the data is even more important because we've added like another layer of variables, right, to student learning. So not only were we looking at like all the other factors, but now we have they been at home? What's the home situation like when they're, when they're trying to learn remotely? And so I feel like now the data analysis is even more in depth than it was before, because it has to be, right, to try to understand what's going on with each student.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Others?
Yeah, and I also, I'm at the Diocese of Monterey in California, and we use the STAR testing as well. And exactly what Barbara said, the data is, and Rebecca said, the data is the most important, more than any other year, I think, this year, in looking at it. And one of the nice things that STAR does is it allows you to track a student up to like 6-7 years of seeing at each grade level, and you can kind of follow them through. And what I found this year particularly was the kids were still performing at a grade level, but some of them were dropping substantially in the older grades versus the younger grades, which then, of course, in California, we had the older ones staying at home and the younger ones being in class. So I do think the data this year with the distant learning is going to be playing a big catch up for the next couple of years.
Yeah. Are you finding that parents are really wanting that data? Are they asking for it, or not so much?
Really.
Yeah.
Not really. I think they like to see it as far as the progression of the class.
Mhm.
But I think parents are, we didn't start school until November in person. So we still had that first 3 months of school where they were at home. So I do think now coming out with the positive data in the January test that we just took to show that they are catching up
Right.
from that first test that we did at the beginning of the year is a nice piece for Catholic education in the whole, because of being able to be in person and not really dropping off at the end of last year as well.
Right.
So
That's right. Lori, were you going to add?
Yeah, we use in South Carolina the MAP test as well, and the diocese just closed their MAP window maybe a week ago. So I just pulled reports and have set up a data meeting with my classroom teachers. I just like a preliminary, but I'll go ahead and give a shout out to Dr. Reyes, the Notice and Wonder protocol. We'll be doing that next week, trying to set up goals and see where we need to get to for our May testing.
I think I need to invite all of you into my world. And the challenge that I'm experiencing is some of the teachers didn't want to take the test because they were worried about their students and how it would be reflecting on them. And some of the principals felt that way too. So they were protective of their teachers. We ended up doing the MAP testing fall and winter, and we actually did quite well. So it's just a matter of getting over that fear of the unknown. What challenges still exist in your diocese, in your school, relative to just tracking data?
I think for us, the biggest obstacle has been the students that are not on campus, because we did not want to administer the test to them remotely, because you don't know who's helping them, if they're getting any extra resources. So that's been our biggest challenge, that we wish we had 100% of the students assessed, but that hasn't been the case.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to, and I apologize, I'm driving, I'm almost home, and then I'll switch over to my computer.
Okay.
But one of the things that I find challenging is that we've been in person since August. Our elementary data from our STAR testing is phenomenal. Most all of our grades are at 80 to 100% proficient. Middle and high is not as great. And I have a couple different reasons for why that is. But one issue and one challenge I see, and this is more of a cultural thing, as far as the culture that we currently have with our school, is that our school is seen as more of an elite or an alternative to the public school. And so those scores are really important. But one of the shifts we're trying to make in our mission and in our really trying to change and shift the culture is more of educating our parents on the holistic formation of the child, and really seeing the kids for who they are as individuals, and knowing that these screeners are just one small picture of the development of the kids. And therefore, it's great that your kid can have success on a standardized test, but where are they developmentally as far as an individual holistically, mind, body, and soul? So one of the struggles I have is because when you asked if parents are asking for the data, and they do, and that's been something that's been shared and it's a focus on our marketing. But what concerns me is that I really want to shift so that our culture, so parents understand that the holistic formation is what's really important, and that to get these kids to perform on these standardized tests the way they are is we have some phenomenal teachers. And it's in that formative assessment where we're forming, where the kids are learning, where that is actually taking place. And again, with a holistic approach, it takes so many different components that produces that outcome. So to really have parents so I was working with our marketing gal on creating almost an infographic or a explanation of this screener is just a small part of a big picture. What's really happening is the nitty gritty and the teachers and all these different types of formative assessment, including how we're forming them holistically. So for me, a challenge is shifting parents. I guess I'm sorry, maybe I took this in a different direction, but it's just for me, I'm just trying to really focus on changing and shifting the parents' understanding of what we use these screeners and this data for, our teachers, so they understand what this screener and data is for, and also understanding that the real formation is happening with our teachers in the classrooms on those day-to-days and through a lot of that formative assessment.
It's one set of data. Yep.
One set of data.
Yeah, yeah, good. Okay, well, thank you for that. And you lead right naturally into this next piece, which is just the 3 conditions for data use. There's a need for the quality of the data, and you've all spoken to the assessments that you're using. There's other data that's out there. As you said, the formative data within the classroom, the data capacity, as well as the data culture. So let's talk about each one of those. Using multiple measures to ensure relevance and the ability to triangulate. So in other words, using all of those data pieces and saying, okay, how do these match up? How are these aligning and helping us see a big picture of the student? Making sure the data is well organized. You had just said, who was it? Was it Barbara who just said that you did a data day with your teachers? Is it in like a data carousel? Is it somehow showing that information so that they can make sense of it as well? Danielle, how did you set yours up? Was it Danielle? I think it was Danielle.
Yes. Well, they had already had a chance to look at their data on their own on a half a day and to reflect. And I did already give them a heads up that we were weak across the board in writing. So to kind of look at that they would have to come and that we would discuss together what their SMART goal would be for their own classroom. So I kind of prepped them before today. And then today was more just kind of getting to the nitty gritty. What is our SMART goal going to be? Who are you going to target? What exact standard are you looking at, or what are you going to focus on, so that I could make sure that they were really making good goals for themselves and what their action plan, and that they took at least a minimum of one solid action step, that they knew that I was going to be looking at the spring map data from this goal. So it was kind of like multi-step. Like today we had a day, but they had steps before today.
Sure. Great. Well, that's the organization piece. Exactly. Great. So using data before the data shelf life has expired, that's an important piece. How many of you, if you could just kind of do a hand raise or the electronic hand raise, how many of you have a common SIS in your districts? Student information system. Well, that's interesting. Only 2 of you that I can tell. We do not either, and we just find that we're really that is hamstringing us too. So the shelf life, it becomes old fast. Rebecca, it looks like you understand what I'm talking about there. And then disaggregating the data for analysis across multiple factors. So this is all the data quality piece. What we'd like you to do, and I'm going to let John go ahead and take this over, is to just rate yourself in your own school, whether you feel like you are exemplary in this area, proficient, developing, or beginning, just out of curiosity. Okay, that's great. So as we go through this, I mean, Danielle, you talked about you're wanting teachers to make their SMART goals. It might be important for you to make your own SMART goal about data use in your own building as we go through this. So we'll keep moving forward. So the data capacity is about the organizational factors such as collaborative teams, norms, responsibilities to support data use. Do you have that expectation in your building that, and is it set up that way to support data use? Data access, do they have access to the data? I have heard in so many schools that I visit, the data sits on the shelf and it never comes off. So that's an important piece. It's great to hear that you're using these the data that comes back from this testing. And then data literacy, are you allowing your people to really understand what this data means? Like you said, it's it's one thing to have the data, it's another thing to really understand how it's going to help improve student learning. So if you could go ahead and just rate yourself on that one. Okay,
Bridget Dixon. Bridget.
sorry about that. Okay, next one. The last one, data culture. I think this is going to get back to the whole introduction that we had, which was the what is the culture in the building that's building the trust in using this data. It's a commitment. That word keeps coming up, the commitment from everyone to make better use of data. And that has to be set by the vision for the data. A culture of collaboration at all levels. Modeling of data by school teachers. That would be lovely, school leaders, to be able to show them how you're using that data. And then finally, a commitment to making ongoing instructional improvements. That, again, this is all based on relationship and trust and willingness. I loved, someone said, I loved it, willing to make mistakes and try, just to give it a try, and to go back and correct whatever it was and try again. So let's go ahead and rate ourselves on this one.
There's a great phrase I love, Kristen, about this too, from Jim Collins. It says, conduct autopsies without blame.
Yes, thank you. That's a great one. Okay, so it looks like for most of us that we're beginning and developing. So that's that culture. And as new leaders in a school, I wouldn't expect that your culture is set to really yet to really be able to do this completely. So that's actually great that you're all willing to acknowledge that and to hopefully want to move forward on that. Okay, so what I'd love for you to do here is to look for your tool that you have on your screen where you can underline words, phrases.
Under view options.
Thank
So if
you.
you're not clear about that, go up to view options and do annotate. Just click on annotate and you'll
Everybody
see.
got that?
Yep. So everyone should have that.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
Okay, everybody got that? Okay. So read that quietly to yourself. And let's just go ahead and annotate the words that speak to you most about data culture and what you would like to make sure you are moving toward in your school to improve your data culture. So I'd love to be able to ask you to kind of help me understand your answers here. And it looks like, Stephen, did you have your hand up? Just want to make sure.
No, I think that was from earlier.
Okay, all right. Stephen, if you don't mind answering this first question, since I called on you, can you just speak to us about what you underlined and why?
Well, so the two that I did were continuous and collaboration, in part because like everyone believes in improvement like in a moment, but this kind of like has to keep going forward, has to keep heading somewhere. So I thought that was an important kind of keyword. And then collaboration is a big deal. And I think it's hard in our schools that have like one grade per class, what that looks like, because when you're talking with your colleagues, you're talking about different data sets all the time or different standards that you're comparing them to. And so that's always a big challenge. And I always work on how it is that what it is a collaboration looks like inside of my school.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can I call on somebody else to offer what they've chosen? Carrie Ann, how about you?
I underlined emphasize collaboration, and I circled accountable and empower teachers, because when I think about improving our data culture at my school, I think about something I heard at a PLC conference, which was like most teachers collaborate, or we have oftentimes schools that have cultures of collaboration, but really what are they collaborating about? And as a new leader this year, I've tried to be intentional about giving them opportunities to collaborate about things that will help them build the capacity to actually talk about the data, because right now we are not at a place where they can do that comfortably. And so I think that was just what was on my mind. I think I'd love to be at a place where we're collaborating about the data and they're holding one another accountable as they have those conversations, because it's about helping all kids learn. It's not just fourth grade students versus third grade or whatever. So those are the reasons why I underlined those things.
Carrie Ann, what do you suppose you could do in order to help build that? Sounds like you have a vision of how you want to use it. I'm just curious what you think you could do to help move that forward.
Yeah, one of the things, since we are, I think Stephen mentioned, I have a school where we only have one class, each grade is only one teacher. I spent some time reading some books about PLC and collaboration with singleton schools. So I've been trying to get my teachers to come together and talk about what are the non-negotiable things that are for each of their grades, and then looking at how we would align that vertically and talk about rubrics and what that would look like at each grade level. So that's a long process that we haven't been able to really dig as deeply into this year, because obviously we're all dealing with a lot of other things. Just getting through the year, but that's a little bit of my vision going forward about what I would like to see.
Yeah, but what I love about what you said is you have a vision of how you want to use it. So that's awesome. Thank you. Anybody else want to share?
I underlined or circled continuous, that it's just not a one-time thing. It's something that's you are continuing looking at it. You don't look at it, put it aside, and then move. It's longitudinal.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move forward. So, can we get rid of all that scribbly stuff? John, I don't know how to do that. Oh, there we go. Okay. So here's a protocol that we're going to ask you to talk about in breakout rooms. So in terms of your data, I like to think of this, as I mentioned before, a data carousel. If you are in a singleton school, it could be you're setting up data sets around the room, and then 2 by 2, they go visit all these different data sets. So they're just not looking at one set of data. And then they're writing that their reflections based on these questions right on a poster, so that at the end, you have these lovely reflections about the data. So what is this protocol? So here's what, so what, and now what. So we start with the here's what, just factual statements. I noticed, I'm surprised, I'm not surprised. I noticed a potential pattern. I wonder what is driving the difference. And then to review the data and discuss with a partner, what do you notice about the overall performance of the students? How did the overall performance change? Slightly increase, decrease? And are there any patterns? Are there surprises? So again, this is all based on the factual statements. So that was here's what. Now we get to so what. Notice the time amount on each one of these. So that's a very, very quick kind of, I'm looking at the data quickly, but the so what is the interpretation of the data. So review the data and discuss with a small group what might be contributing to the overall performance level. If applicable, to what would we attribute the change or lack of change from year to year? And what questions does this data generate? So you don't have the answers necessarily, but you're starting to think about what these the reasons could be. And then finally, now what? So here's what, and it sounds like many of you have done this kind of a protocol where you're saying, okay, now based on this, what are we going to do about it? So this is where the action items come in. What can we do as a classroom? What can we do as a school? as an archdiocese, we look at this and say, what can we do as an archdiocese in terms of our professional development that we can offer? How will we monitor and collect the evidence, and what are the additional strategies or steps necessary for a plan of action? Okay, so here's what, so what, and now what? And I like to think of this as like a data carousel. So what we'd like you to do is, I think it's going to be like groups of 4 or 5. Is that right, John or Kevin? Be about 4 or 5,
Sure.
2 groups?
Yes.
Yeah. In terms of data culture, where are you currently, your faculty, your school, and how could you use this protocol now where you're at in your school? Okay. So does that, any questions about that? Okay. And let's go ahead and go to those breakout rooms. Back, everyone. Is everybody back, John?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, I'd love for you to share an idea that you heard in your group that someone else shared. See how well we listen to one another. I'd like to share. Yeah, James.
So I got a great piece of advice. So I'm a first year principal, and and I have a one grade per class here at my school. And one of the questions I asked, and all of my group members kind of agreed, and Barbara specifically, if given the opportunity to, with a student's data score that's not performing well in, let's say, second grade, really kind of creating a PLC or the opportunity at the beginning of the school year and then continuing through the school year for that teacher in second grade to connect with the new teacher in third grade as to bring that student up. So just providing those opportunities. So so that's one of the things I'm going to work hard to, at least at the beginning of school next year, is kind of implement that ability for the teacher, the previous teacher, to connect with the new teacher with those lower performing students, to kind of give them the things that worked well in second grade, give it to them in third grade. So that was a great.
So they're not relearning all to them. Yeah, all over again. Yeah, great. So props to Barbara. Is that right? Is that what you said? Yeah. Thank you, Barbara. Anybody else want to share what you've learned? Something.
I know in our
So-
group, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I know in our group, Stephen had also mentioned that in his half-day data chats, he does something where he puts up the poster boards on the wall and the teachers go up and annotate something they learned from just observing or reviewing the data. I think that helps build what we were talking about, trust and
Yes.
accountability with the teachers, because they'll see that they're not alone in the process. And maybe within those annotations, they'll get other groups together that maybe are dealing with the same issues. So I think that was a great idea too.
That's great. Thank you, Barbara. And who offered that? Stephen.
Stephen.
Props to Stephen. That's great. Anybody else? Danielle, you were going to speak?
Yes, we kind of got into, somebody raised a question. I guess they were concerned about their middle school scores and noticed a trend that always kind of takes a dip. And so the question was kind of posed, is it really a cultural thing or a developmental thing? So we got into a big discussion about that. So Abby brought that up. She was a little worried about the middle school score. So we started talking about that.
So what'd you decide? Is it developmental? Is it nature, nurture? What'd you decide?
We kind of concurred it's mostly developmental, but
Okay.
we also, talked about some other things as well, but that's probably a big part of it.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Something you learned from another person or possibility. I've been told that I don't do wait time very well, so I'm trying to do my wait time.
I mean, I can say what we all agreed on. We definitely
Sure.
agreed that accountability is critical, and the continuous part is those two pieces have to be there for the data analysis to be worthy. So that was like Stephen gave his example, but then he said, you know, sometimes it drops off, and that's true. Like that happens to the best of us, where we implement something and then there's no follow through. So it's the follow through part that we all can work on to make sure that it's actually useful for a long period of time, and it becomes a natural part of what you do. It's not like, oh, today's data day. No, it's like every day should be data day, you know, not just special days even. But Stephen said time is always the problem, and that's true.
It's the truth. Yep. So it's about prioritizing. Yep. Okay, Henry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to, mention the data day piece, because we do set 2 days aside in our calendar in the Diocese of Orlando and all the schools, because one of the things that the teachers did give feedback on is that time is their most precious commodity. And if something is that important, then we need to give time to it, whether it's prayer or data. So, although data is used throughout the year at faculty meetings and PLCs, there's 2 solid days where they as teams break apart their data, and it's highlighted. So just something to be mindful of, that with our teachers, time is a real gift. And so if it is a priority, we need to honor it that way. Yeah.
That's a great segue into the next section, which I just wrote down Henry's idea for me in Seattle Archdiocese. We're going to be talking about systemness, and the fact that you're honoring data by putting 2 days into the calendar that you require of your teacher, of your schools, helps that lift it up as important. You're right. So thank you for that. Okay, so I think we're coming into a break. Is that right, Kevin or John?
Yeah, that's correct. So I think we can sort of take our usual 10 minutes or midway break. We'll reconvene at 10 minutes past the hour.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
So just getting back to the very beginning of this session, we talked about schools data culture, just starting to talk about it really. And then we wanted to explore the role of the principal as a system player. And this is the one that's the most intriguing to me, quite honestly, because I think one of the things that has been born in this COVID time is that the wisdom is not in any one person, it's in the group. It's coming through the group. And we share with one another in our archdiocese, and we support one another with our questions and our want for systemness. But when we make a decision that not necessarily we want to support, then we push away from it. But it truly is the wisdom of the group that has been truly born and wanted for us. So let me see here. There we go. So this quote, I actually, during the break, I wanted to find this quote, and it's from this book. I have my full library, and it's interesting, the context that he had this quote. It's pre-COVID, right? It's pre-COVID, and he was talking about how principals really need to understand that in this world of technology, that the walls are down now, and we can go anywhere and be anywhere. And boy, did we ever learn that in a hard way during COVID. So this quote is probably even more important to us now, to recognize this permeability. I love that word too, that it's porous. We can be anywhere we want at any time. So this is exciting and it's daunting, but I think it's becoming less daunting because we've had to do this. We've been forced into it. So take a look at this quote. I'm not going to make you underline it, but I'd love for you to give me some ideas as we go into this next slide of the ways that you see systemness playing out in your archdiocese, your diocese, okay? The principal must seek ideas from other similar schools that perhaps have had more success and must see herself or himself as a system player. When the ideas of thousands of principals are unleashed and shared, imagine the resources. When principals form productive partnerships with other schools, consider the support they can gain through interaction between their staff and that of other schools. So I'd love to know your experience with systemness in your diocese. What are some initiatives that you have taken on that really have required you to reach out to other schools to learn? Yeah, James, go ahead.
Actually, just this week. So we have a weekly teachers or principal meeting with our superintendent, Kimberly, every Tuesday. And one of the things that we've been sort of struggling with and focusing about is the observation of teachers and how we go about with the level of stress that they have with distant learning. Because we're doing a Zoom. Zoom is occurring while the teacher is teaching in the class with the students who are still not comfortable. So it's kind of trying to finding this right balance of not being obviously understanding the needs of the teacher and how does that play with observation. So we had two teachers or two principals in our diocese that shared how they're doing it and provided the rest of us the forms and guidelines that they're kind of following through this year. And for me as a new principal, it was unbelievably helpful to look at.
I bet that was golden. Yep.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And so I've sort of grabbed that, and then I had my teachers, my staff meeting today, and I've kind of shared that with them. Like, here are the documents that I'm going to be looking, and I've of course adjusted them to my needs. But overall, it's as a system for the entire diocese. I think most of us are going to kind of latch onto that way to be mindful of how we're treating our teachers and how we can be sort of.
Yeah, we're learning from one another. And you know what, James, if there's a way that you can connect with another principal to say, how'd you use that form? If it's not working for you, you just continue to make those connections. So yeah, that's a great example. Any others from diocese?
I have one.
Yeah, carry on.
So similar to James, I have a meeting with the principals in my deanery. Our diocese is so large because it encompasses the entire state of Idaho. So we meet monthly on Zoom with just the principals in our deanery. And recently, one of the other principals had some issues with just a financial situation that she needed some guidance on. So we decided to meet together to talk about developing some common policies, because we all have different student handbooks. And what we were thinking, if we were to separate some of the policies and make them all uniform, then our handbooks could still be unique and more the things that pertain to all families, instead of having every single policy written out and makes your handbook really long. So that's something that we've undertaken as a small group of principals that we will then go back to share with all of the principals in the diocese. So that's often how we work as members of the system. Also, my bookkeeper met with her bookkeeper because she's new, to try to help them with their financial problem that they're having, that we had experienced earlier in the year. So I think what you're saying is absolutely true. Just knowing how you are impacting other people who have similar situations and not being afraid to ask for help.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
Yeah. Other things.
Yeah. Carrie Ann, we're in Idaho.
I'm in Pocatello. Okay. And our diocese is centrally located in Boise. So the Boise principals, I think they get together a lot more because there's a lot more schools in the Treasure Valley. I'm in the Eastern Deanery. And then as a whole deanery, as a whole state, we meet about once a month on Zoom. And then we only see each other about once a year. We have an annual principals meeting where we go and meet like at the beginning of the year. It's usually in September. So it's the only time we see each other in person.
So here's some cross diocese connection too. I'm from Idaho. So I know that all those dioceses really well. And we just went through that process of creating a common handbook. And we're happy to share that with you if you would like it. And it's the kind where these are the policies that have to be there, and these are the policies that are yours and you decide. So happy to share that with you if you'd like that.
Thank
Okay?
you,
Just
Kristen.
reach out. Yeah. Any other examples?
I
Abby?
have one. We, again, it's very similar to James and Carrie Ann. We have we meet twice a month with our diocese and our superintendent and the principals. And at the beginning of the year, we were in need of an anatomy teacher. And this is something I've desired for a long time. So I just asked, I said, does anyone have anybody who would be willing to virtually, connect with us and network on, teaching virtually anatomy? And I had a smaller school. It was actually the school I went to. They said, yeah, hey, we'd be interested in doing that. And so it only happened for one semester because a lot of the kids dropped out, unfortunately, but it wasn't because she didn't do a great job. I just think they were more upset it wasn't for college credit. But they were dissecting fetal pigs virtually, watching her do it and doing it on on our end. We had one of we call them, she's academic success resource teacher. She had that period free. So she proctored in the room while the kids were taking the class. So that was a win, I guess, for me, because I think we can be very strong in our diocese if we start doing more networking. Yep. I think about our singletons, and we have a lot of schools with singleton teachers and how we could connect and have conversations. And so this was a win. This was awesome.
Good for you. Good for you. That's awesome. That's great. Thank you for that example. So system player. So let's just take a look. Has anyone seen this chart before? Just if you take a look at that. Okay. So if we think about, I'm going to use my little cursor here. This end represents all of this x-axis is all of the schools, okay? This is school relationships. And this end represents to the archdiocese. That's how I'm interpreting it. Kevin, if you want to chime in and say that there's a different way to look at this,
that's perfect. Yeah, that's
okay.
perfect, Kristen.
Great. So I would just love for you to think about if a person is in this quadrant, okay, low in terms of relationships with other schools and low with relationships to the archdiocese or to the Office for Catholic Schools, what do you suppose a school like, can they succeed? Yes, no? They can succeed. Can others succeed based on their work? Not so much, right? Because they're insulated. They're not stretching out. What happens when it's over in this area? So that would be high horizontal partnership and low to the archdiocese. What do you suppose happens there?
A disconnect with the overall goals of the archdiocese.
Okay. And can a school be successful there? Yeah, I mean, they can be, but they can oftentimes be, at least in our area, that region. It's that region. They don't pay attention to us. So it's that region, right? And they're going to kind of take care of themselves. What happens when we're up in this quadrant here? So high archdiocese and low school relationship.
I mean, I would think you're a brown noser, but that's me.
I would say there's no buy-in.
To what?
So you're saying high diocese, low school partnership?
Correct.
So you're just kind of doing what's told to you from top down. You're not like really thinking what affects your own school locally, and you're just kind of doing what's doing. So are your teachers buying into it? Are your parents buying into it?
Okay, good. And then this final quadrant, what do you suppose is happening over there? Okay, I'm setting you up, guys.
I think you're probably having more impact in that top right. than
In
you
what
are-
way, Marianne? In what way?
I mean, in terms of like how you're able to mutually benefit both other schools and your diocese and vice versa.
Yep.
Like everybody's learning from everybody and everybody's supporting everybody.
Yep.
I
So
also think that's where change leadership comes from. Sometimes, in my experience, there's a bit of a disconnect between the Arch or the Office of Catholic Schools and the experience of the schools together. But when there's a lot of collaboration between schools and a good relationship with the OCS, then you end up with the ability to kind of even drive the direction of the schools in the diocese.
mhm. You help to create that or establish that new initiative through your efforts. So just for the sake of these titles then, why do you suppose this this title of atomistic works for that area? Just in terms of what does that mean? What does that bring to mind? We don't even need to look at the formal definition. Just what does that bring to mind?
You're floundering on your own. You're
Yeah,
hanging
just-
out by yourself.
That's right. So they're just, little atoms that are just bouncing around all by themselves, right? Informal networking, it's happening, but it's not on any kind of sustained basis. Line authority, like you said, Stephen, sometimes that's a brown noser, and sometimes it's, is there any buy-in, as Danielle pointed out, and then system coherence. That's what we're shooting for, the systemness. So I'd like to bring up with you, and so obviously we're trying to move from that atomistic to the system coherence. I wanted to bring up to you three concepts that are based in the Catholic social teachings. And these are three concepts that are actually part of our mission statement from the Office for Catholic Schools in Seattle. Communion, solidarity, and subsidiarity. And when you think of communion, think in terms of communion with the church, in terms of the bishop, that you are his missionary discipleship. You're his missionary disciple in each of these schools. You're in communion with the bishop. That's the purpose of our schools, is to be an evangelizing mission for our parishes. We're in solidarity with one another. What affects one will affect all. So we want to help support all. We've learned that very clearly. And then finally, subsidiarity. What can be taken care of at the local level should be taken care of at the local level. Think about your schools and in classrooms. I always used to say to teachers, can this discipline problem be dealt with at the classroom level, or does it need to be bounced into my office? I must have had 300 kids come into my office the first year that I was principal at a school. And we had to have a sit down talk and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? What can be taken care of at the lowest level, right? So same is true for schools. What can be taken care of at the lowest level? The Office for Catholic Schools or the Archdiocese does not need to step in at every turn. We really value that, concept of subsidiarity, okay? Any questions about that? Kevin, any more that you want to add to that?
You know what, all I'd say, Kristen, I think it's such a great way to frame it, because even within the Fullen book and what we were just talking about with regard to coherence, he talks about too loose, too tight, kind of from like a district level or diocesan level to the school level. And I've always thought about it from our Catholic lens as solidarity and subsidiarity in terms of this balance where we want schools to be autonomous. We want them to be creative and innovative and responsive to their local communities. And yet we want them to understand that they're part of a larger mission, a part of a larger system, and that not every Catholic school is just out there floating on its own. So I just love this framing because I think it fits with Fullen so well, and yet it puts it in that Catholic frame, which I love.
Yeah, I just had a heart-to-heart with my executive principals who are representatives of our 10 regions. And they were basically saying to me, because we wanted to push this initiative through for a common school admin, which is a marketing enrollment program, and it was a funded mandate. They termed it as a funded mandate. So Kristen, don't be worried that you're asking us to do something that is not within your rights to ask. This is what being tight is about. It's important that we have this mandate because you need the data. We didn't have the data, and you need the data for your donors. So there are times when the Archdiocese has to come across as tight on certain initiatives, and then there are other ways that we can be loose. Okay, moving on then. What would I need to do to maximize partnerships with other leaders? In terms of where you are right now, you're all first year, second year leaders, with the exception of, I think it was Danielle, who was third year. Okay. So you've had opportunities to meet with leaders, but what would you do to maximize those? And why is it important to seek out like-minded leaders that may not be like-minded? What do you learn from people who are not of the same perspective? And what are ways that your diocese provides opportunities for system collaboration and real school-to-school or principal-to-principal learning? I'd love to know that. And I believe, is this a breakout session?
It is.
Kevin? Okay, thank you. So just to give you an idea, as I said at the very beginning, our principals are meeting every single day in our archdiocese, and we only meet for half an hour, and you'd be amazed at what can happen in a half an hour. So what are the ways that your diocese provides opportunity for system kinds of collaboration? Okay. And John, are you going to put those questions in the chat?
I will. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
How many minutes? Welcome back, everyone. Do you see my screen? Yes, it's there. Okay, great. What question did you spend the most time with, and what was your conversation about? I know it's getting late.
Our group talked a lot about the third question. That's kind of where we started. And I think that all of us kind of agree that we appreciate these opportunities for collaboration, and that especially just kind of like trying to figure out how we can borrow best ideas from each other and use those. And we all kind of have the experience of the pandemic kind of giving us more of that opportunity, and it being somewhat fruitful.
Great, wonderful. The fact that you're doing this for yourselves is really amazing, especially in COVID. You've committed to this program. That shows your willingness and want, wish, desire to be part of a bigger group, and not to be a solo principal. What are some opportunities that the Archdiocese, I'm just curious, or diocese has done for you to bring people together? You've given me a couple of examples already. Carrie Ann, with the experience that you've had in Idaho with the coming together of principals. Are there other examples that people can think of?
I can attest to the Archdiocese of New York. Well, when you had that grid up, I didn't realize that we were in the top right quadrant as far as the PLC that I've been in for almost 3 years has a coach that was in the diocese for 33 years. She was a principal. So her knowledge of the diocese, plus there's like 4 newer principals in the group, was getting us to that quadrant, right? Because she was able to connect us with what she knew, she learned from experience, and what was in line with what they were saying, plus what we were experiencing, like on the, boots on the ground level. So the amount of learning that I experienced from those PLCs, we met like once a month, and we still are via Zoom, but I made friendships there with the other
Yeah.
principals, and that honestly saved me, just to know I had a friend in a similar role, so it can go a lot further if the PLC is done well, if it connects people that are like-minded. And there's some people that you sit there and you're like, oh, I will never do that. And you just bite your tongue, and you learn from both, good examples of what's going on and also what you shouldn't do. And then I think it was James that said, or no, it's maybe Stephen that said in our breakout that you learn from the different, the diversity of the group too. Like my school's in northern Westchester, New York, which is very different than my friends that were in the Bronx.
Yeah.
And so, but they've become my best friends, and learning from them and their experiences has helped me where I am, and vice versa. So
What a wonderful, wonderful example of exactly what we're talking about. I actually had the privilege of working with a colleague who was from New York and was actually one of those coaches at one time. And so she was explaining that whole system to me, and I thought, wow, that's so awesome. That's just great. Perfect example. What do you think you need to do to maximize partnerships with other leaders in your diocese? What do you think you need to do?
I know this year I've just been willing just to go out on a limb and just ask for the help.
Good.
I think
say,
I don't know.
I think COVID has made us all be okay with being, I don't know, okay with that phrase. So that's a great example. We're going to go ahead and go on. So we've done the data culture. We've quickly, like I said, the role of the principal as a system player, which is one that I'm constantly unfolding and understanding and learning more about. And we just wanted to touch on the financial operational vitality. And we'd love to know where you're at with your budget forecasting, and how the pandemic has impacted your financial performance. I know in the Archdiocese of Seattle, we have a lovely foundation that is providing us not only, beyond the PPP, but also it's providing us with the COVID relief fund. They've raised $4 million for our schools, and schools apply for that grant. So it's been a huge gift, given the extra cost. So I'm just curious where you're at with your budget forecasting. What does it mean to you to forecast? And how has the pandemic impacted that? It's pretty tough when you're a brand new principal, but if you've had a couple of years, this might be easier. Anybody want to share?
I'll just share quickly. Our enrollment is expected to increase next year.
Yay.
Which is financially we're in a good position also because we have the Florida Choice Scholarship, so that makes it for us very sustainable, and has been, so in that respect. And then with all of the federal funding and the good cooperation we've had from our LEA, that's been a big impact, because we've been able to save in areas where we would normally spend and grow in areas where we wouldn't have held back in. And I think that, we haven't, I would say like the biggest impact for us and how COVID has changed things is that this kind of collaboration that began in the pandemic, we started meeting every week and saying, how are you doing this? What are you doing? What are you planning? It turned into also kind of cooperative deals. So for instance, I've never had an ELL teacher, but I have another school who has one, but maybe is underutilized. So now we're going to share that employee. We're gonna I'm gonna take 2 days, she's gonna take 3, and we're gonna offer services we haven't offered before. And so COVID has kind of impacted that, right, with the ability to say, okay, let's think smart about our money and how can we use it in the most effective way, and how can we share with other schools. We're going to have a shared counselor next year who's going to visit each of the schools and do kind of more direct counseling, instead of just kind of well, the lack of that, which we had before. So like these are things that are born out of this kind of pandemic and are also
Yep.
a part of how we're looking at our budget.
I love that, Stephen. Thank you. Yes, these are the things that have been born out of that pandemic. You've explored new ways through systems to help impact your budget in a positive way. Anybody else want to just share with me where you're at with your budget forecasting? That question. Is it a scary thought?
I just want to say, I feel uneasy about it because of the how enrollment could go in the, like, enrollment looks really good right now for fall, but I don't know that I trust that because
Yeah.
maybe that's the result of the pandemic, like a negative. But I feel like, okay, I'm looking at purchases for next year, you know, but are these people really going to stick it out with me, you know, in the fall?
Yeah.
Are they really going to show up on the first day of school? Because it looks great right now on the books, but are they going to actually start paying tuition, you know? So that's my like concern right now about my budget, you know.
Yeah.
Like what purchases will be the right ones, you know, how many kids am I actually going to see come September?
Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca.
In Monterey here in California, I'm feeling pretty good about it as well. We started the year off at about 162, and we are currently up to 189.
Good for you.
Just from November, and again, a lot of that has to do with the all of our public schools in our area are still distant learning, so we were able to grab. The fortunate part that I see is that a lot of those students are also, parents are registering for next year as well as this year, so they're kind of putting it out initially. And then we also have 19 new applications, new families that have already pre-registered for next year, because I think for them going back to public schools here in our part of California is not going to look normal to them. So trying to get as normal, the normal sort of school day in is important. So
yeah, I think in the Archdiocese of Seattle, this hybrid approach of having some students that are remote and some students in the classroom is just, it's fatiguing to these teachers, and they're carrying pretty heavy loads. So they just want to make a decision. Are we in, are we out? But we don't want this in between stuff. And no one can really make that decision yet. So it is impacting the budget. Anyone else before I move forward? Okay. In January, February, a principal should begin putting together a broad budget framework to help them in their planning, staffing, and setting of tuition. The framework should include, okay, so I'm just reading this out to you. These are good points to remember. Enrollment projections, which is the very thing that we're worried about, right? Enrollment projections, worst case, best case, and likely scenario. I used to hand off to my school commission, here's the worst, I'm sorry. Here's the worst case scenario, here's the best case, and this is what I'd like it to be. So, you know, you have to show them that you've thought through these things. Fundraisers, development projections. It's another one that's really difficult given COVID. Auxiliary activities and revenues. And then your expenses, staffing aligned with projected enrollment. So what's that enrollment again? And what are your staffing needs? Any new programs or initiatives? I love hearing, James, that you figured out how to, or was it Stephen, figured out how to share these various staff members. Certainly that helps you. Any new programs, standard overhead plus incremental increase. So hopefully you're moving down that road. Hopefully you're not forgetting to do all of that. Setting tuition. This is a challenge. And I'm curious, before I even read this, if people could just share, I know we don't have too much time left, but I'd love to know how you set your tuition at this point. Before we read this, Danielle?
I don't have to. One of the good things about being in the Archdiocese of New York, if you're a regional school, it's done for you. I mean, it has its pros and cons, but you know, you have people who are doing that, who are analyzing all the data, who are deciding what it's going to be, and they're just giving it to you. So, I mean, you can say, you'd have some sort of discussion. I don't think my parents can pay that, but at the end of the day, what they say and whatever they worked out, that's what's going to happen.
Wow. That's amazing. Anyone else want to share how you establish your tuition? Has anyone established their tuition for next year? Yeah, Carrie Ann, how was that established?
What I did this year was I looked at the rates that we had when I came in. Last year, the school board decided to increase tuition rates by 3%. And even, which was fine, maybe, but then in looking at the data from what the other schools in my deanery are charging, it became really clear that we were charging a lot of money compared to what the median income is in our area. And even though we don't have other Catholic schools to compete with, we're also analyzing like the demographic of people who are likely to want to send their children here. So what we decided to do this year was to analyze a lot of all of the current revenue that we're receiving with our current enrollment, and then look at if we changed our pricing structure to maybe entice more larger families to want to enroll. So we kept the base tuition rates the same, but then went from but then looked at the percentage discount that we were giving with multiple students enrolling from the same family. And we moved from a percentage-based process that didn't seem like it had any, I mean, I don't know, because it's probably was figured out a long time ago. We went to a fixed rate for additional students after the first student. And then I changed some other things in order to make it seem more affordable for families. Like we opened registration much earlier this year for current families and offered a registration discount if they register by a certain time, and then that will bump up. And then we moved the class fee portion to the end of the year, so that gives families more time to commit to all of their fees, and then offered 10 and 12-month payment plans in order to encourage more larger families to enroll. We've been promoting it in our parish as well. Our school board and father committed to trying that for 1 year. And I calculated that it would only take me a goal of 10 new students, even with decreasing tuition, to actually make up the difference in terms of current revenue, accounting for an increase, for an incremental increase as well. So that's what I did with my bookkeeper, and we worked together on it. I haven't finished doing a budget for next school year yet. I had to revise my budget in September when I came on because there were some problems with it, but I'm happy that we are on target at like 66% of what I anticipated we would be at for expenses and income, which feels like a huge win considering that I have like zero experience, doing any of this financial stuff. So that was really positive. Anyway, that's probably more info than you wanted.
No, actually, the best part of what you said for me was that you figured out the 10 students would help you, would help create that. So there needs to be some data, again, to support these decisions of going, increase or, and what percentage increase. So, and of course, I always like to say, and what are we paying our teachers? Because the teachers are always, they're subsidizing Catholic education by the amount that they're not receiving in a public school. So that's just another way to frame it for families. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this, Kevin, this piece?
No, I think that was great. I feel like the one piece I would always share about tuition is that, and I loved what Carrie Ann said, and she's clearly given it tons of thought and analysis, but as the general rule of thumb is try to make sure you're increasing tuition every year. Because I think sometimes schools get upside down when they feel like they've got to freeze tuition because they're worried about families leaving and your costs are going up. So the general rule is that you should be increasing it something every year because your costs are going up. And so just be cognizant of that. And if you're going to do something like freeze or even reduce, be really thoughtful the way Carrie Ann just kind of outlined how she went through that process.
Great. Okay, let's see. Pretty much that's what we just said. That You're right. Carrie Ann just gave us an example of that.
And I'll share
sometimes
one more
those
thing too,
increases-
maybe quickly
Yes,
Kristen,
please.
on this too,
Mhm.
because I feel like communicating tuition increases is really, really important. I would always advise you to have a parent meet, and obviously in non-COVID times, have a meeting with your parents in person. I know it's hard to get them there, incentivize them, because it's always best to give that message in person where you can see their faces, get their reactions, especially if you're increasing, if you've got a lower income parent population. Always talk about the cost to educate as like your starting threshold, because we always charge tuition that's lower than cost. So make sure every single parent knows that the cost to educate is $6,000 a year, and we're only charging you $4,000 a year, whatever it is. So because you want to communicate the value that they're receiving, and you want to do that in person if possible. So
And keep going back to, is it worth it? And you just keep making sure that they understand that it's worth it. We have our principals in the Archdiocese give a state of the school about March, and that's where they give their budget and their increases. And but they start it always with, look at all the stuff that we've been able to do this year. Look at all of what you've been able to help us accomplish. Look at all the good stuff. These are our goals. And then you have your budget that shows the expenses and the amount of income that you need in order to cover those expenses. And, you know, I always had my school board, the finance people, do that because it's our school. It's not Mrs. Dixon's school. It's our school. So that was a good way to help them understand the finance piece.
I
They
also, can I
registered
just
for
add,
it.
I think transparency is really important. Like not sharing what your costs are and not being kind of transparent about your budget, I think is the first thing that causes families to wonder why it's being raised. And I think that just being open about that, we have nothing to hide. We're not running a shady
Exactly.
business. So.
Exactly. You're not running off to a spa. Right. Okay, I think that's it for tonight. I did want to end with a prayer. These tasks, can you help them understand what these tasks are? Kevin, I don't have a sense of that. Or John?
Yeah, so just as we've done, following all of our live sessions, we'll be providing supplemental resources to help you sort of take your key learnings and translate them into what you're doing in your schools. And so obviously the key piece here is going to be the here's what, so what, now what protocol that we had a chance to unpack and discuss at the tail end of our first segment on data culture. So expect that on Link Spring, as well as a recording of tonight's session. And that's pretty much it.
Great. Okay, and I did want to end with a prayer, and this prayer is coming from this book, and I don't know how many of you have seen this book, but it is Henry Nouwen, You Are the Beloved. It's lovely. So I highly recommend it. Every day is just such a treasure. So this particular one speaks to the life of a principal so completely. So I'm just going to read that for us as an ending, okay? So I thank you for being here. I thank you for sharing so willingly. I thank you for taking the time, setting aside the time to really learn about your craft. You're called to this ministry. I just totally believe that. So thank you for saying yes. So in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. You are not what you do, although you do a lot. You are not what you have collected in terms of friendships and connections, although you might have many. You are not the popularity that you have received. You are not the success of your work. You are not what people say about you, whether they speak well or whether they speak poorly of you. All these things that keep you quite busy, quite preoccupied, and often, quite preoccupied, are not telling the truth about who you are. I'm here to remind you, in the name of God, that you are the beloved daughters and the sons of God, and that God says to you, I have called you from all eternity, and you are engraved from all eternity in the palm of my hands. You are mine. You belong to me, and I love you with an everlasting love. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks, everybody.
So I just want to quickly and thank Kristen for her wonderful leadership tonight. It just so wonderful and great to engage all of you in conversation. So Kristen, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful evening. So
great. And I learned from you. So thank you very much for sharing.
All right, and we'll have some emails out about Link Spring, and we'll talk to you all very soon. God bless.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.